Autumn's Cold Truth. Lady Emmeline of Dunmore had spent years weaving secrets into the fabric of court life. But when Sir Roderick Locksley, the king's silent blade, caught her slipping a message into the wrong hands, she felt the weight of his scrutiny. "You have made a dangerous mistake, my lady," he murmured. "Tell me, was it worth it?" Chapter 1. The Falcon's Shadow. The tapestry swayed gently, its threads depicting a falcon in mid-flight, wings outstretched against a stormy sky. Lady Emmeline of Dunmore watched it, her fingers tracing the embroidered outline of the bird's fierce, golden eye. The great hall of Dunmore Castle was alive with the murmur of voices, the clinking of goblets, and the scent of roasted boar, but Emmeline felt a chilling isolation, a premonition as sharp and cold as the winter wind howling outside. She had lived 52 years, seen empires rise and fall, witnessed the births and deaths of kings. Her own life had been a tapestry woven with threads of gold and shadow, of privilege and peril. Widowed young, she had navigated the treacherous currents of court life with a skill that had earned her both admiration and fear. Her late husband, Lord Alaric, had been a powerful man, a close confidant of King Edward, but his death had left Emmeline vulnerable, a pawn in the games of ambitious men. She had learned to play their game, to weave her own web of influence, using secrets as her currency. Tonight, however, felt different. The air was thick with an unspoken tension, a sense of impending change. King Henry, Edward's successor, was a young, volatile ruler, prone to fits of temper and easily swayed by his advisors. His recent marriage to Queen Isolde of Mercia had brought a fragile peace to the warring kingdoms, but beneath the surface, old rivalries simmered. Emmeline knew that the peace was as delicate as spun glass, liable to shatter at the slightest pressure. She smoothed the fabric of her emerald gown, the heavy velvet a comfort against the chill that seeped from the stone walls. Her gaze drifted to the high table, where King Henry sat, flanked by his queen and his most trusted advisors. Queen Isolde, with her cascade of raven hair and piercing blue eyes, was a vision of regal beauty, but Emmeline sensed a steeliness beneath the surface, a determination that matched her own. And then there was Sir Roderick Locksley. He sat a little apart from the others, a silent, watchful presence. He was known as the King's Shadow, his blade ever ready to defend the crown. His face was a study in contrast sharp, angular features, a jawline hardened by years of battle, and eyes that seemed to see everything, yet reveal nothing. He was a man of few words, but his reputation spoke volumes. He was said to be utterly loyal to the king, incorruptible, and merciless to his enemies. Emmeline had always been careful to avoid his notice. She knew that he was a man who valued loyalty above all else, and she had learned, through bitter experience, that loyalty was a luxury she could rarely afford. Her survival depended on her ability to play all sides, to maintain a delicate balance between competing factions. But tonight, that balance had been disrupted. The message she had slipped to Lord Ashford's messenger had been intercepted. A simple missive, ostensibly about a shipment of wool, but containing a coded reference to a meeting of disgruntled nobles, men who felt their influence waning under King Henry's rule. It was a risky move, but Emmeline had deemed it necessary. She needed to know who she could trust, who was truly loyal to her, and who was merely waiting for an opportunity to betray her. She had not anticipated Sir Roderick's intervention. He had appeared as if from nowhere, his movements as silent and deadly as a hunting cat. He had intercepted the messenger in a darkened corridor, taken the message, and dismissed the man with a curt nod. And then he had turned his gaze on Emmeline. "You have made a dangerous mistake, my lady," he had murmured, his voice low and resonant, like the rumble of distant thunder. "Tell me, was it worth it?" His words hung in the air, a silent accusation. Emmeline had met his gaze, her heart pounding in her chest, but she had forced herself to remain outwardly calm. She had offered him a small, enigmatic smile. "A mistake, Sir Roderick? I assure you, I make no mistakes." He had not replied, merely studied her with those piercing, unreadable eyes. Then, with a slight bow, he had turned and walked away, leaving Emmeline to grapple with the consequences of her actions. Now, as she stood in the great hall, surrounded by the trappings of power and privilege, she felt the weight of his scrutiny, the chilling realization that her carefully constructed web was unraveling. The falcon in the tapestry seemed to mock her, its freedom a stark contrast to her own precarious position. She was trapped, caught in the crosshairs of a power struggle that threatened to consume her. And Sir Roderick Locksley, the king's silent blade, was watching her every move. The scent of the roasted meat suddenly turned cloying, and the murmur of conversation sounded like the hissing of snakes. She touched the small, silver locket hidden beneath her gown, a relic of a past she could never truly escape, and steeled her resolve. She would not be defeated. She would find a way to survive, even if it meant facing the king's shadow himself. The game had changed, but Emmeline of Dunmore was still a player. She took a deep breath, the air heavy with the scent of wood smoke and fear, and prepared to face the storm. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Gallery. The long gallery, lined with portraits of Dunmore ancestors, was usually a place of quiet contemplation for Emmeline. Sunlight streamed through the tall, arched windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and casting long shadows on the polished wooden floor. Today, however, the gallery felt oppressive, the painted eyes of her forebears seeming to follow her with silent judgment. She had retreated there after the feast, seeking a respite from the watchful eyes of the court. The encounter with Sir Roderick had shaken her more than she cared to admit. She had always prided herself on her ability to read people, to anticipate their moves, but the king's shadow was an enigma. His silence was more unnerving than any threat, his gaze more penetrating than any blade. She stopped before a portrait of her grandmother, Lady Isolde of Northwood, a woman renowned for her beauty and her sharp wit. Isolde's eyes, a startling shade of violet, seemed to hold a spark of defiance, a refusal to be cowed by the constraints of her time. Emmeline often felt a kinship with her grandmother, a shared understanding of the challenges faced by women in a world dominated by men. "What would you do, grandmother?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rustling of her skirts. "How would you navigate these treacherous waters?" The portrait, of course, offered no answer, but the act of speaking the words aloud brought a measure of solace. Emmeline had learned long ago that she could rely on no one but herself. Her husband's death had taught her that lesson with brutal clarity. He had been a strong man, a respected warrior, but he had been felled by a stray arrow during a border skirmish, leaving Emmeline to fend for herself and their young son, Thomas. The thought of him brought a fresh wave of anxiety. He was now a young man, eager to prove himself, but he lacked his father's experience and his mother's caution. He was currently serving as a squire to Lord Ashford, the very man to whom Emmeline had sent the intercepted message. She had hoped to use Ashford to gauge the loyalty of the northern lords, but now she feared that she had inadvertently placed her son in danger. A sound behind her made her turn. It was Alara, her lady-in-waiting, a young woman with a gentle demeanor and a loyalty that Emmeline had come to rely on. Alara had been with her for many years, a silent witness to her triumphs and her struggles. "My lady," Alara said softly, "Sir Roderick Locksley requests a word with you." Emmeline felt a knot of apprehension tighten in her stomach. She had hoped to avoid another encounter with him, at least for a while. But she knew that she could not refuse. To do so would only arouse his suspicions further. "Show him in, Alara," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. Alara bowed and retreated, leaving Emmeline to face the king's shadow alone. She straightened her shoulders, composed her features, and prepared to meet his gaze. He entered the gallery a few moments later, his footsteps silent on the polished floor. He was dressed in dark clothing, his only adornment a silver falcon pendant, the emblem of his loyalty to the king. He stopped a few feet away from her, his eyes assessing her with that unsettling intensity. "Lady Emmeline," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I trust you have recovered from your indisposition." The sarcasm was subtle, but it was there. Emmeline met his gaze, without flinching. "I am quite well, Sir Roderick. Thank you for your concern." "Concern is my duty, my lady, as is ensuring the safety of the realm." And you believe that I pose a threat to that safety? He did not answer directly. Instead, he gestured towards the portrait of Lady Isolde. A formidable woman, your grandmother. She was known for her influence. She was also known for her loyalty to the crown, Emmeline replied, her voice laced with a hint of defiance. Loyalty is a complex thing, my lady. It can be tested, broken, or even misplaced. He paused, letting his words hang in the air. Emmeline felt a chill run down her spine. He knew. He knew about the message, about her connections to the dissenting nobles. But how much did he know? And what was he planning to do about it? The sunlight seemed to dim, and the gallery felt colder, the whispers of her ancestors seeming to echo Sir Roderick's unspoken accusations. She placed a hand on the cold stone of the window ledge, drawing strength from its solid presence. She would not be intimidated. She would not betray herself. She would play his game, and she would win. Chapter 3. A Dance of Deception. Misplaced loyalty can be a dangerous thing, Sir Roderick, Emmeline conceded, her voice carefully neutral. She turned away from the window, forcing herself to meet his gaze directly. But I assure you, my loyalty to King Henry is unwavering. She saw a flicker of something doubt, perhaps, or even amusement in his eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. His face remained an impassive mask, revealing nothing of his thoughts. Is that why you were communicating with Lord Ashford? He asked, the question a soft, velvet-covered blade. Emmeline allowed herself a small, carefully crafted smile. Lord Ashford is a valued supplier of wool to my estates. Our correspondence was purely of a mercantile nature. Wool, he repeated, the word hanging in the air like a challenge. A most versatile commodity. It can be used to clothe the innocent, or to conceal the guilty. I am not concealing anything, Sir Roderick, Emmeline said, her voice rising slightly, though she fought to maintain her composure. I have nothing to hide. He stepped closer, invading her personal space, his presence both intimidating and strangely compelling. She could smell the faint scent of leather and steel, the scent of a warrior, a man accustomed to command. Everyone has secrets, Lady Emmeline, he murmured, his voice so low that only she could hear it. Even you. She held her breath, her heart pounding against her ribs. She had to be careful. One wrong word, one flicker of fear, could betray her. She forced herself to maintain eye contact, to project an image of serene innocence. If you are referring to the petty grievances of a few disgruntled nobles, she said, her voice regaining its composure, I assure you, they pose no real threat to the king. They are merely venting their frustrations. Frustrations that could easily escalate into rebellion, he countered. With the right encouragement. I am not encouraging anyone, Sir Roderick, she insisted. I am merely listening. It is my duty, as a loyal subject of the king, to be aware of the sentiments of his people. He studied her for a long moment, his eyes searching, probing. She felt as if he could see into her very soul, read the secrets she had guarded so carefully for so long. The silence stretched, taut and heavy, broken only by the distant sounds of the castle going about its daily business. Finally, he spoke, his voice devoid of any emotion. I will be watching you, Lady Emmeline. Every move you make, every word you speak. Do not disappoint me. The threat was implicit, unmistakable. Emmeline felt a shiver of fear, but she refused to let it show. She inclined her head slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement, not submission. I would not dream of it, Sir Roderick, she replied, her voice as smooth and cold as polished marble. He gave a curt nod, then turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the long gallery. Emmeline watched him go, her mind racing. She had survived this encounter, but she knew that the game had only just begun. He was suspicious, and he would not rest until he had uncovered the truth. She turned back to the portrait of her grandmother, seeking solace in the painted eyes of the woman who had defied kings and emperors. The dance of deception had begun, and Emmeline knew that she would have to be more cunning, more ruthless than ever before. Her son's life, her own survival, depended on it. The weight of her ancestors, their triumphs and failures, pressed down on her, a reminder of the legacy she had to uphold. The gallery, once a refuge, now felt like a cage, the portraits like silent witnesses to her desperate gamble. She touched the locket beneath her gown, the cold metal a reminder of a love lost and a promise she had yet to fulfill. She would not falter. She would not fail. She would outwit the king's shadow, even if it meant playing the most dangerous game of her life. The dust motes danced in the sunlight, oblivious to the web of intrigue being spun around them, and Emmeline prepared for the next move. Chapter 4. The King's Decree. The summons arrived the following morning, delivered by a royal messenger bearing the king's seal. Emmeline recognized the crimson wax, the intricate design of the lion rampant, a symbol of power and authority. Her heart quickened its pace, but she maintained a calm exterior as she broke the seal and unfolded the parchment. The message was brief and to the point. King Henry requested her presence at court to attend a council meeting concerning the ongoing tensions with the northern lords. The summons was not unexpected, given her recent conversation with Sir Roderick, but it still filled her with a sense of unease. She knew that she was walking into a trap, a carefully orchestrated performance designed to expose her treachery. She handed the parchment to Alara, who read it with a worried frown. "My lady, this is dangerous," she said softly. "Sir Roderick's suspicions are clearly aroused." "I am aware of the danger, Alara," Emmeline replied, her voice betraying none of her inner turmoil. "But I have no choice. To refuse the king's summons would be tantamount to an admission of guilt." "But what will you do?" Alara asked, her eyes filled with concern. "How will you convince the king of your loyalty?" Emmeline smiled, a small, determined smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "I will do what I always do, Alara. I will weave my web. I will play their game and I will win." She spent the rest of the day preparing for her journey to the royal court, which was located in the fortified city of Winchester, several days' ride from Dunmore Castle. She chose her attire carefully, selecting a gown of deep blue velvet, embroidered with silver thread, a symbol of her status and her unwavering resolve. She also packed a small, locked chest containing documents and letters that could be used to support her claims of loyalty or to implicate her enemies, if necessary. As she rode through the gates of Dunmore Castle, flanked by a small escort of her most trusted guards, she looked back at the imposing stone walls, the banners bearing her family crest fluttering in the wind. She wondered if she would ever see her home again. The journey was fraught with peril, not only from the political machinations of the court, but also from the very real dangers of the road bandits, rogue knights, and the ever-present threat of war. The landscape was a tapestry of rolling hills, dense forests, and fast-flowing rivers. The air was crisp and cold, the sky a vast expanse of gray, mirroring the uncertainty of her future. She spent much of the journey in silence, lost in her own thoughts, weighing her options, calculating her risks. She knew that she would have to be more cunning, more ruthless than ever before. As they approached Winchester, the city came into view, a sprawling mass of stone buildings, dominated by the imposing royal castle, perched high on a hill overlooking the surrounding countryside. The sight of the castle, with its towering walls and battlements, filled her with a mixture of awe and apprehension. This was the heart of the kingdom, the seat of power, and she was about to enter its treacherous embrace. She was met at the city gates by a contingent of royal guards who escorted her to the castle. The streets were crowded with people, merchants hawking their wares, soldiers marching in formation, nobles riding in their carriages. The air was thick with the smells of wood smoke, spices, and unwashed bodies. She was ushered into a small, sparsely furnished chamber, where she was told to wait. The room was cold and damp, the only light coming from a narrow window high in the wall. She paced restlessly, her nerves on edge. The waiting was the worst part, the anticipation of what was to come. The stone walls seemed to press in on her, and the silence was broken only by the occasional distant sound of a trumpet or a shouted command. She touched the familiar weight of the locket beneath her gown, drawing strength from the memory of the man who had given it to her, a man whose love had been both her salvation and her curse. She closed her eyes, picturing his face, his smile, the warmth of his embrace. It was a memory she clung to, a reminder of a time when life had seemed simpler, less fraught with danger. The sound of the door opening made her jump. Sir Roderick Locksley stood in the doorway, his face as impassive as ever. He had come to escort her to the king. The decree was about to be delivered, and Emmeline's fate hung in the balance. Chapter 5. The Serpent's Coil. Sir Roderick's presence was a silent command, a subtle assertion of power. He did not speak as he led her through the labyrinthine corridors of the castle, his footsteps echoing on the stone floors. Emmeline followed, her head held high, her expression carefully composed. She was aware of the curious glances of the courtiers they passed, the whispers that followed in their wake. She was a marked woman, an object of suspicion, and she knew that every move she made was being observed, scrutinized, judged. The council chamber was a vast, imposing room, dominated by a long, oak table surrounded by high-backed chairs. King Henry sat at the head of the table, his young face set in a stern expression. Queen Isolde sat beside him, her regal bearing a stark contrast to her husband's nervous energy. The other members of the council, a mixture of nobles, clergy, and royal advisors, were already seated, their faces a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Emmeline was directed to stand before the king, her position isolating and vulnerable. She met his gaze, her own eyes unwavering. He looked older than his years, the weight of the crown already etched on his brow. "Lady Emmeline of Dunmore," he began, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. "You are summoned here today to answer certain concerns regarding your loyalty to the crown." The words were formal, but the underlying accusation was clear. Emmeline inclined her head slightly. "I am here to serve my king, your majesty. I have always been loyal to the crown. Yet there are reports," the king continued, his voice gaining strength, fueled by his advisor's whispers, "of your correspondence with certain individuals who are known to be disaffected." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. Emily knew that he was referring to Lord Ashford and the other northern lords. She had to choose her words carefully. "I am aware of the rumors, your majesty," she said, her voice calm and steady. "But I assure you, they are unfounded. My correspondence with Lord Ashford was purely of a business nature." "Business?" A sneer twisted the lips of Lord Beaumont, one of the king's closest advisors and a known rival of Emmeline's late husband. "Is that what you call it, my lady? Conspiring with traitors?" Emmeline turned to face Beaumont, her eyes flashing with anger. "I am not conspiring with anyone, my lord. I am merely gathering information, as any loyal subject would do." "Information?" Beaumont scoffed. "Or intelligence, to be used against the king?" "Enough," King Henry interjected, his voice sharp. "Let's not resort to accusations, my lord. Lady Emmeline, you will provide us with a full account of your dealings with Lord Ashford and any other individuals who may be questioning our authority." Emmeline knew that she was trapped. To refuse would be an admission of guilt. To comply would be to reveal her hand, to expose her network of informants. She had to find a way to navigate this treacherous path, to satisfy the king's demands without betraying herself or her allies. The serpent of suspicion had coiled itself around her, and she felt its grip tightening. She drew a deep breath, composing herself. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice regaining its composure. "I am happy to provide you with any information you require. But I must insist that my correspondence with Lord Ashford was entirely innocent. He is a valuable trading partner, and I would not jeopardize that relationship by engaging in any treasonous activities." She saw a flicker of doubt in the king's eyes, but Beaumont was not so easily swayed. "We have evidence, my lady," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "A message, intercepted by Sir Roderick Locksley, that suggests otherwise." Emmeline felt a chill run down her spine. The intercepted message. She had hoped that it would be overlooked, dismissed as insignificant. But Sir Roderick, it seemed, had not forgotten. He stood silently behind the king's chair, his presence a constant reminder of the threat he posed. The coil tightened further, squeezing the air from her lungs. She had to think fast. She had to find a way to turn this to her advantage. She looked directly at Sir Roderick, a challenge in her eyes. The game was far from over. Chapter 6. Beneath the Cloak of Night. Emmeline met Sir Roderick's gaze, her mind racing. She had to deflect the accusation, to sow doubt in the minds of the council. She couldn't deny the existence of the message, but she could challenge its interpretation. Sir Roderick is a meticulous man, she said, her voice steady and clear, addressing the king but keeping her eyes locked with Locksley's. I am sure he can attest to the innocuous nature of the message. It concerned a shipment of wool, as I have already stated. She saw a flicker of something surprise, perhaps, or even a grudging respect in his eyes, but his face remained impassive. He stepped forward, his voice a low rumble that resonated through the chamber. The message did indeed mention wool, Your Majesty, he confirmed. But it also contained a coded phrase, one that is often used by those who communicate in secret. Emmeline allowed herself a small, dismissive smile. A coded phrase? How dramatic. I assure you, Sir Roderick, I am not a spy master. I am a businesswoman. The phrase in question was merely a safeguard, a way to ensure that the message was not tampered with. A safeguard, Lord Beaumont interjected, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Or a signal to your fellow conspirators. I have no conspirators, my lord, Emmeline retorted, her voice sharp. I am merely protecting my interests, as any prudent merchant would do. King Henry looked from Emmeline to Sir Roderick, his expression troubled. He was clearly torn between his trust in his loyal knight and his reluctance to believe that a woman of Emmeline's standing could be involved in treason. Sir Roderick, the king said, do you have any further evidence to support your suspicions? Locksley hesitated for a moment, his eyes still locked with Emmeline's. She held her breath, waiting for his answer. She knew that he could destroy her with a single word. But he also knew that he did not have irrefutable proof. It was a battle of wills, a test of nerve. Not at this time, Your Majesty, he finally said, his voice devoid of any emotion. But I believe that further investigation is warranted. Emmeline felt a surge of relief, but she knew that she was not out of danger yet. The king's suspicions had been allayed, but not entirely dispelled. She had bought herself some time, but she knew that Sir Roderick would not give up. Very well, King Henry said, his voice weary. Lady Emmeline, you are dismissed. But I expect you to remain at court until this matter is resolved. And I trust that you will cooperate fully with Sir Roderick's investigation. Emmeline inclined her head, a gesture of compliance. Of course, Your Majesty. I have nothing to hide. She turned and walked away, her back straight, her head held high. She could feel the eyes of the council members following her, their gazes a mixture of suspicion and speculation. She had survived another round, but the game was far from over. As she left the council chamber, she found Alara waiting for her, her face etched with worry. My lady, what happened? She asked anxiously. I have been temporarily exonerated, Emmeline replied, her voice tired. But Sir Roderick is still pursuing his investigation. We must be very careful. They retreated to Emmeline's chambers, a small but comfortable suite of rooms overlooking the castle courtyard. Emmeline dismissed her guards, wanting to speak to Alara in private. We need to send a message to Thomas, she said, her voice low. He must be warned. And we need to find out who betrayed us. Someone must have informed Sir Roderick about the message. Alara nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. I will see to it, my lady. But what about you? What will you do? Emmeline looked out the window, at the darkening sky. The cloak of night was descending, concealing the secrets and dangers of the court. She had a plan, a risky gambit that could either save her or destroy her. She would use the night to her advantage, to uncover the truth and to turn the tables on her enemies. She would seek out Sir Roderick Locksley, and she would confront him, not as a suspect, but as an equal. The serpent's coil had tightened, but Emmeline was not yet defeated. She would strike back, using the shadows as her weapon. Chapter 7. The Price of Loyalty. The castle was shrouded in darkness, the only illumination coming from flickering torches in the corridors and the faint glow of moonlight filtering through the narrow windows. Emmeline moved silently through the shadows, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpets. She had changed from her court gown into a simpler dress of dark gray, the color of shadows, and she had wrapped a dark cloak around her shoulders, concealing her face. She knew that Sir Roderick would be expecting her to remain in her chambers, under the watchful eyes of his guards. But Emmeline had never been one to follow expectations. She had learned long ago that to survive in the treacherous world of court politics, one had to be unpredictable, to take risks, to defy convention. She had sent Alara to deliver a message to a trusted contact in the city, a merchant who had connections to the northern lords. She needed to know who had betrayed her, who had informed Sir Roderick about the coded message. And she needed to warn her son, Thomas, to be cautious. Her destination was Sir Roderick's chambers. She knew it was a dangerous move, walking into the lion's den, but she had a plan. She needed to understand him, to find his weakness, to turn his suspicions to her advantage. She had to convince him, not of her innocence, but of her usefulness. She found his chambers at the end of a long, deserted corridor. The door was unguarded, a testament to his confidence, or perhaps his arrogance. She hesitated for a moment, her hand on the cold iron latch. She took a deep breath, steeling her nerves, and pushed the door open. The room was sparsely furnished, reflecting his austere nature. A single candle burned on a small table, casting long shadows on the stone walls. He was standing by the window, looking out at the darkened city, his back to her. He was not wearing his armor, but a simple tunic and breeches, his sword belt lying on a nearby chair. He looked vulnerable, somehow less intimidating than he had in the council chamber. "Sir Roderick," she said softly, her voice barely audible above the crackling of the candle. He turned, his eyes widening slightly in surprise. He had not expected her. She saw a flicker of something else in his expression: admiration, perhaps, or even attraction. It was a fleeting glimpse, quickly masked, but it was there. "Lady Emmeline," he said, his voice a low rumble. "What are you doing here?" "I came to talk," she said, stepping further into the room. "To understand why you are so determined to destroy me." He raised an eyebrow, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Destroy you?" "I am merely doing my duty, my lady, protecting the king from his enemies." "And you believe that I am one of those enemies?" He did not answer directly. Instead, he gestured towards a chair. "Sit down, Lady Emmeline. Let us talk candidly." She sat, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. He remained standing, his presence dominating the small room. "I know about your connections to the northern lords," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "I know about your dissatisfaction with the king's rule." "I am not dissatisfied with the king's rule," Emmeline countered. "I am merely concerned about the direction the kingdom is taking. The northern lords are powerful men, and their grievances should not be ignored. Their grievances are fueled by ambition, my lady, by a desire for power. And is that not the driving force behind all politics, Sir Roderick?" she asked, her voice laced with a hint of challenge. "The pursuit of power?" He studied her for a long moment, his eyes searching, probing. "Power is a tool, my lady," he said finally. "It can be used for good or for ill. It depends on the wielder. And you believe that you are a wielder of good, Sir Roderick?" "I believe that I am loyal to my king," he replied, his voice unwavering. "And that is all that matters. Loyalty." It was the cornerstone of his existence, the driving force behind his actions. But Emmeline knew that loyalty could be a double-edged sword. It could blind a man to the truth, make him a pawn in the hands of others. She had to find a way to make him see that her loyalty, though tested, was still to the crown, albeit a different interpretation of what served the crown best. The price of his loyalty was high, but so was hers. The candle flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and Emmeline knew that she was walking a tightrope, balancing between survival and destruction. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken words, and she prepared to make her next move, a gamble that could either save her or condemn her. Chapter 8. A Night's Vigil. Loyalty is a virtue, Sir Roderick, Emmeline said, breaking the silence, her voice soft but firm. But it should not be blind. It should not be used to justify injustice or oppression. She saw a flicker of something doubt, perhaps, or even agreement in his eyes, but it was quickly masked. He remained silent, watching her, waiting for her to continue. The Northern Lords are not rebels, Sir Roderick, she said, leaning forward slightly, her voice earnest. They are men of honor, men who have served the crown faithfully for generations. Their concerns are legitimate. They fear that the king is being misled by his advisors, that he is losing touch with the needs of his people. And you believe that you are the one to enlighten him? He asked, a hint of sarcasm in his voice. I believe that I can offer him a different perspective, Emmeline replied. A perspective that is not clouded by personal ambition or political maneuvering. She paused, letting her words sink in. She knew that she was taking a risk, revealing her true intentions, but she had to gamble. She had to make him see her as an ally, not an enemy. I know that you are a man of honor, Sir Roderick, she continued, her voice gaining strength. A man who values truth and justice. I am not asking you to betray your king. I am asking you to consider the possibility that there may be another way. A way to achieve peace and stability without resorting to force. He remained silent for a long moment, his eyes studying her intently. She could feel the weight of his gaze, the power of his scrutiny. The silence stretched, taut and heavy, broken only by the crackling of the candle and the distant sounds of the castle stirring in the pre-dawn hours. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and resonant. And what is this other way you propose, Lady Emmeline? She drew a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She was about to reveal her hand, to lay bare her plans. It was a dangerous move, but she had no other choice. I propose a dialogue, she said, her voice steady. A meeting between the king and the Northern Lords, mediated by someone they both trust. Someone who is above reproach, someone who is known for their fairness and their integrity. And who would that be, my lady? He asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. Emmeline met his gaze without flinching. You, Sir Roderick. The word hung in the air, a challenge, a proposition, a gamble. She saw the surprise in his eyes, the flicker of uncertainty. He had not expected this. He turned away, walking back to the window, his back to her. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the conflict in his posture. He was a man torn between his duty to his king and his own sense of honor. A night's vigil was a time of solitary reflection, and it seems he had kept his all these years. You ask much, Lady Emmeline, he said, his voice muffled. You ask me to question the king's judgment. I am asking you to uphold your oath, Sir Roderick, she replied. To serve the realm, not just the king. To ensure that justice is done, even if it means challenging those in power. He turned back to face her, his eyes filled with a mixture of emotions, doubt, anger, and something else, something that looked like respect. And what if I refuse? He asked, his voice challenging. Then you will have condemned the kingdom to civil war, Emmeline said, her voice unwavering. And you will have betrayed your own ideals. The silence returned, even heavier than before. The candle flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls, mirroring the turmoil in their hearts. The fate of the kingdom and their own destinies hung in the balance. Emmeline had made her move, and now she had to wait for his response. The night was coming to an end, and the dawn would bring either a new beginning or a devastating end. Chapter 9. The Torn Tapestry. Sir Roderick remained silent, his gaze fixed on Emmeline, his expression unreadable. The weight of her words, the audacity of her proposal, hung in the air between them. He was a man of unwavering loyalty, a knight sworn to serve his king, and she had asked him to question that loyalty, to challenge the very foundation of his existence. You asked me to walk a dangerous path, Lady Emmeline, he said finally, his voice low and gravelly. A path that could lead to my own destruction. It is a path that could also lead to the salvation of the kingdom, Emmeline countered, her voice firm. A path that could prevent bloodshed and chaos. He turned away, pacing the room, his hands clasped behind his back. She could see the conflict raging within him, the struggle between his duty to his king and his own conscience. He was a man of honor, a man who valued justice and truth, and she had appealed to those very values. "The king trusts me," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "He relies on my judgment, my loyalty." And he should, Emmeline agreed. But even kings can be misled. Even kings can make mistakes. Your loyalty should be to the realm, Sir Roderick, not just to the man who wears the crown. He stopped pacing, turning to face her, his eyes filled with a mixture of emotions. She saw doubt, anger, and something else, something that looked like hope. "And you believe that you can guide me on this path?" he asked, his voice challenging. "I believe that I can offer you a different perspective," Emmeline replied. "A perspective that is not clouded by the intrigues of the court. A perspective that is based on the needs of the people, not the ambitions of the powerful." She stood up, walking towards him, closing the distance between them. She looked him directly in the eyes, her gaze unwavering. "I know that you are a good man, Sir Roderick," she said, her voice soft but filled with conviction. "A man who wants to do what is right. I am asking you to trust me, to trust your own instincts, to help me save the kingdom from itself." He studied her for a long moment, his eyes searching, probing. She felt as if he could see into her very soul, read the secrets she had guarded so carefully. The silence stretched, taut and heavy, broken only by the faint sounds of the castle awakening. Finally he spoke, his voice barely audible. "I will consider your proposal, Lady Emmeline, but I make no promises." Relief washed over Emmeline, but she knew that this was only the first step. She had planted the seed of doubt in his mind, but she had yet to convince him to act. "Thank you, Sir Roderick," she said, her voice sincere. "That is all I ask." She turned to leave, but he stopped her with a hand on her arm. His touch was surprisingly gentle, sending a shiver through her. "Why are you doing this, Lady Emmeline?" he asked, his voice curious. "What is your true motive?" She looked at him, her heart aching with a mixture of emotions. She saw the pain in his eyes, the loneliness of a man who had dedicated his life to service, who had sacrificed everything for his king. She saw a kindred spirit, a soul as weary as her own. "I am doing this because I believe in a better future," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "A future where justice prevails, where peace reigns, where love can flourish. A future that I may not live to see, but one that I am willing to fight for." She saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes, a recognition of their shared humanity. He released her arm, and she turned and walked away, leaving him alone with his thoughts. The tapestry of her life, once whole and vibrant, was now torn and frayed, the threads of her past and present intertwined with the uncertain future. But as she walked back to her chambers, a glimmer of hope sparked within her. She had touched the heart of the king's shadow, and she knew that, even in the darkest of times, love and loyalty could still find a way. The dawn was breaking, casting a pale light over the castle, and Emmeline prepared for the next challenge, her resolve strengthened by the encounter. Chapter 10. Secrets of the Hearth. The days that followed were a tense waiting game. Emmeline remained at court, outwardly compliant with the king's decree, but inwardly consumed by anxiety. She met with Sir Roderick several times, their conversations guarded, their interactions a delicate dance of trust and suspicion. He questioned her about her connections to the northern lords, about her past, about her motives. She answered his questions truthfully, but selectively, revealing only what she deemed necessary, concealing the deeper secrets that could endanger her and those she cared about. She also used her time at court to gather information, to observe the dynamics of the royal household, to identify potential allies and enemies. She learned that Queen Isolde was not as naive as she appeared, that she had her own agenda, her own network of informants. She also discovered that Lord Beaumont, the king's advisor, was deeply in debt and that he was susceptible to bribery. One evening, as Emmeline was sitting by the hearth in her chambers, reading a book of poetry, Alara entered, her face pale and drawn. "My lady," she said, her voice trembling. I have news from the city. Emmeline's heart quickened its pace. She had been waiting for word from her contact, the merchant who had connections to the northern lords. What is it, Ilara? She asked, her voice calm despite the turmoil within. The merchant, he has identified the informant, Ilara said, her voice barely audible. The one who betrayed you to Sir Roderick. Emmeline leaned forward, her eyes fixed on Ilara's face. Who is it? Ilara hesitated, her eyes filled with fear. It is Lord Ashford, my lady. Emmeline felt a cold wave of shock wash over her. Lord Ashford. The man she had trusted, the man who had served as her son's mentor. It was a betrayal that cut deep, a wound that reopened old scars. Are you certain? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Ilara nodded. The merchant is certain, my lady. He has proof. Ashford has been secretly communicating with Lord Beaumont, receiving payments in exchange for information. Emmeline closed her eyes, trying to make sense of this new revelation. Ashford's betrayal explained much. It explained Sir Roderick's suspicions, the intercepted message, the king's summons. But it also raised new questions. Why had Ashford betrayed her? What was his motive? And, most importantly, what did this mean for her son, Thomas, who was still serving as Ashford's squire? We must warn Thomas, she said, her voice regaining its strength. He is in danger. I have already sent a message, my lady, Ilara replied. But I fear it may be too late. Ashford is a cunning man. He may have already anticipated our move. Emmeline stood up, pacing the room, her mind racing. She had to act quickly. She had to protect her son, even if it meant confronting Ashford directly. The secrets of the hearth, the whispered confidences, the shared meals, all of it had been a lie. Ashford had been playing a double game, using his position of trust to betray her. And now, her son was caught in the crossfire. She looked at Ilara, her eyes filled with determination. We will leave the castle tonight, she said, her voice firm. We will ride to Ashford's estate and confront him. We will get Thomas back, no matter the cost. Ilara nodded, her eyes reflecting Emmeline's resolve. They began to make preparations, gathering their belongings, arranging for horses to be saddled, and securing a safe passage out of the castle. The night was once again their ally, concealing their movements, protecting them from the watchful eyes of their enemies. Emily knew that she was embarking on a dangerous mission, but she was prepared to face any peril to protect her son. The secrets of the hearth had been revealed, and the price of loyalty was about to be paid, in full. Chapter 11. The Raven's Flight. The escape from the castle was a tense, clandestine affair. Emmeline and Ilara, disguised as servants, slipped through the darkened corridors, their hearts pounding with each creaking floorboard and distant footstep. They had bribed a stable hand to provide them with 2 horses, and they had secured a forged pass that would allow them to leave the city gates unchallenged. As they rode through the sleeping city, the silence was broken only by the clatter of their horses' hooves on the cobblestones and the distant hooting of an owl. The air was cold and crisp, the sky a vast expanse of darkness, pierced by the faint glimmer of stars. Emmeline felt a sense of freedom, a release from the suffocating constraints of the court, but it was tempered by the knowledge of the danger that lay ahead. They rode for hours, pushing their horses to their limits, their destination the estate of Lord Ashford, a journey of several days under normal circumstances. They had to reach Thomas before Ashford discovered their escape and took action to prevent them from reaching him. As dawn approached, they sought refuge in a small, deserted chapel, its stone walls offering a temporary respite from the cold and the wind. They ate a meager meal of bread and cheese, sharing their fears and their hopes in hushed whispers. Do you think Thomas is safe, my lady? Ilara asked, her voice filled with concern. I don't know, Ilara, Emmeline replied honestly. But I pray that he is. Ashford is a cunning man, but he is also a coward. He would not risk harming Thomas unless he felt cornered. But what if he is already? Ilara couldn't bring herself to finish the sentence. We cannot think like that, Ilara, Emmeline said, her voice firm. We must believe that Thomas is alive and well. We must have faith. They rested for a few hours, taking turns to keep watch, their ears attuned to any sound that might signal danger. As the sun began to rise, they set off again, their journey continuing through a landscape of rolling hills and dense forests. They encountered few travelers on the road, a sign of the unrest that was brewing in the kingdom. The news of the king's summons to Emmeline had spread like wildfire, fueling the rumors of rebellion and civil war. As they approached Ashford's estate, Emmeline felt a knot of apprehension tighten in her stomach. She knew that she was walking into a trap, but she had no other choice. She had to confront Ashford, to demand the return of her son. They arrived at the estate under the cover of darkness, the imposing manor house looming before them, its windows dark and unwelcoming. They bypassed the main gate, seeking a less conspicuous entrance. They found a small, overgrown path that led to a side door, used by servants and tradesmen. Emmeline dismounted, handing the reins of her horse to Alara. "Wait here," she said, her voice low, "and be ready to flee if necessary." Alara nodded, her eyes filled with fear, but also with determination. Emmeline approached the door, her hand resting on the hilt of a small dagger she had concealed beneath her cloak. She took a deep breath, steeling her nerves, and pushed the door open. The raven, a symbol of ill omen, had flown, carrying with it the secrets of betrayal and the promise of confrontation. Emmeline stepped into the darkness, prepared to face whatever awaited her. Chapter 12. A Glimmer of Trust. The interior of Ashford's manor was eerily silent, the air thick with a scent of dust and decay. Emmeline moved cautiously through the darkened corridors, her senses on high alert. She had expected to encounter guards, servants, some sign of life, but there was nothing. It was as if the house had been abandoned. She found her way to the main hall, a vast, imposing room with a high, vaulted ceiling and a large, empty fireplace. The moonlight filtering through the tall windows cast long, eerie shadows on the floor. She could hear the faint sound of creaking wood, the rustling of unseen creatures, the whispers of the past. Suddenly, a voice broke the silence. "Mother?" Emmeline spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the faint light, was Thomas, her son. He looked older, wearier than she remembered, his face bearing the marks of hardship and uncertainty. "Thomas!" she exclaimed, rushing towards him, embracing him tightly. "You are alive. Thank God." He held her close, his body trembling slightly. "Mother, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice filled with confusion. "It is dangerous." "I came to get you," Emmeline replied, her voice choked with emotion. "I know about Ashford's betrayal." Thomas pulled away, his eyes widening in surprise. "You know?" "Yes," Emmeline confirmed. "We have proof. He has been informing on us to Lord Beaumont." "I suspected as much," Thomas said, his voice grim. "He has been acting strangely lately, secretive and suspicious. But I had no proof." "Where is he?" Emmeline asked, her voice sharp. "Where is Ashford?" "He is gone," Thomas replied. "He left several days ago, after receiving a message from court. He said he was going to see the king, but I don't believe him." Emmeline felt a surge of relief, but also a sense of unease. Ashford's disappearance was suspicious. It suggested that he was aware of her discovery, that he was fleeing justice. "We must leave this place, Thomas," she said, her voice urgent. "It is not safe." "I agree," Thomas replied. "But where will we go?" Emmeline hesitated, her mind racing. She could not return to Dunmore Castle, not yet. It was too dangerous. She needed to find a safe haven, a place where she could regroup, plan her next move. And she needed to find Sir Roderick Locksley. He was the only one who could help her now. She looked at Thomas, her eyes filled with determination. "We will go to the monastery of St. Michael," she said, her voice firm. "It is a place of sanctuary, a place where we can find refuge." The monastery was located several days' ride from Ashford's estate, a secluded retreat nestled in the heart of the mountains. It was a place where Emmeline had sought solace in the past, a place where she had found peace and wisdom. She hoped that it would offer them the same protection now. As they prepared to leave, Thomas paused, looking at his mother with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Mother," he said softly, "you are risking everything for me." Emmeline smiled, a small, weary smile. "You are my son, Thomas," she said. "I would risk anything for you." They left the manor house, slipping back into the darkness, their horses' hooves muffled by the soft earth. As they rode away, Emmeline looked back at the imposing building, its silhouette stark against the moonlit sky. A glimmer of trust had been rekindled between mother and son, forged in the crucible of danger and betrayal. But the road ahead was still uncertain, and the shadows of their enemies still loomed large. They rode towards the mountains, seeking sanctuary and guidance, their fate hanging in the balance. Chapter 13. The Lion's Roar. The journey to the monastery of St. Michael was arduous and fraught with peril. Emmeline and Thomas rode by night, concealing themselves by day, avoiding the main roads and the watchful eyes of the king's patrols. They were fugitives, hunted by both the crown and by the treacherous Lord Ashford, who, they suspected, would stop at nothing to silence them. The landscape was rugged and unforgiving, a tapestry of steep cliffs, dense forests, and fast-flowing rivers. The weather was harsh, with biting winds and freezing rain, testing their endurance and their resolve. They relied on their wits, their skills, and their unwavering trust in each other to survive. During their journey, Emmeline and Thomas spoke of many things. They shared their fears, their hopes, and their memories. Thomas revealed his growing disillusionment with court life, his disgust at the corruption and the intrigue that permeated the royal household. He spoke of his admiration for Sir Roderick Locksley, despite the knight's suspicions of his mother. "He is a man of honor, mother," Thomas said one evening, as they huddled around a small fire, seeking warmth and comfort. "He is different from the others. He truly cares about the realm." Emmeline listened, her heart filled with a mixture of pride and apprehension. She was glad that Thomas had found a role model in Sir Roderick, but she also feared the knight's unwavering loyalty to the king. She knew that if Sir Roderick discovered their whereabouts, he would be duty-bound to arrest them, to bring them back to court. As they neared the monastery, the landscape became even more dramatic, the mountains rising majestically towards the sky, their peaks shrouded in mist and snow. The air was thin and cold, the silence broken only by the cry of a hawk circling overhead. They reached the monastery at dusk, the ancient stone building perched high on a cliff overlooking a vast valley. The sight of the monastery, with its towering walls and its peaceful atmosphere, filled Emmeline with a sense of relief, a feeling of coming home. They were greeted by Brother Anselm, an elderly monk with a kind face and a gentle demeanor. Emmeline had known Brother Anselm for many years, having sought his counsel during times of trouble. He welcomed them with open arms, offering them food, shelter, and sanctuary. "You are safe here, Lady Emmeline," Brother Anselm said, his voice soothing. "No one will harm you within these walls." Emmeline and Thomas settled into the monastery, finding comfort in the simple routines of monastic life. They attended prayers, shared meals with the monks, and spent hours in quiet contemplation. The peace and tranquility of the monastery helped to heal their wounds, both physical and emotional. However, their respite was short-lived. News arrived from the outside world, brought by a traveling merchant, that King Henry had issued a royal decree declaring Emmeline a traitor and ordering her arrest. The decree also implicated Thomas, accusing him of aiding and abetting his mother. The lion had roared, and its wrath was directed at them. Emmeline knew that they could not stay at the monastery any longer. Their presence was endangering the monks, putting them at risk of the king's retribution. She had to find a way to clear her name, to prove her innocence, and to protect her son. And she knew that there was only one man who could help her, Sir Roderick Locksley. She had to reach him, to convince him of the truth, before it was too late. The sanctuary had become a cage, and the roar of the lion echoed in the mountains, threatening to destroy everything she held dear. Chapter 14. The Unveiling. Emmeline knew that contacting Sir Roderick was a perilous undertaking. He was the king's loyal knight, duty-bound to arrest her. Yet, She clung to the hope that his sense of justice, the glimmer of understanding she had seen in his eyes, would prevail. She had to gamble on his integrity, on the possibility that he would listen to reason, that he would see beyond the king's decree. She decided to send Thomas. He was less recognizable, less likely to be apprehended. She entrusted him with a sealed letter containing a plea for Sir Roderick's help, a detailed account of Ashford's betrayal, and a promise to surrender herself to the king's justice if Sir Roderick would guarantee her a fair trial. "Be careful, Thomas," Emmeline said, her voice filled with emotion as she embraced her son. "Your life and mine depend on this." Thomas nodded, his eyes reflecting her determination. "I will not fail you, mother," he said. He departed at dawn, riding a swift horse provided by Brother Anselm, his mission shrouded in secrecy. Emmeline watched him go, her heart heavy with anxiety, her hopes pinned on the success of his perilous journey. She spent the following days in a state of agonizing suspense, praying for Thomas's safety and for Sir Roderick's favorable response. She found solace in the quiet solitude of the monastery, in the comforting rhythm of the monks' prayers, in the timeless wisdom of Brother Anselm. "You must have faith, Lady Emmeline," Brother Anselm said, his voice gentle, as they sat together in the monastery garden, overlooking the vast valley below. "Faith in your son, faith in Sir Roderick, and faith in the power of truth." "I am trying, Brother Anselm," Emmeline replied, her voice weary. "But it is difficult. The king's wrath is a formidable force." "Even kings are subject to the laws of God," Brother Anselm said, his eyes twinkling with wisdom. "And truth will always prevail, in the end." Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Thomas returned. He arrived at dusk, his face weary but his eyes filled with a glimmer of hope. "I have spoken with Sir Roderick," he said, handing Emmeline a sealed letter bearing the knight's falcon crest. "He has agreed to meet with you." Emmeline's heart leaped with a mixture of relief and trepidation. She broke the seal and unfolded the letter, her hands trembling slightly. Sir Roderick's words were brief and to the point. He agreed to meet her at a secluded location near the border of the kingdom, a place known as the Hunter's Glade. He promised her safe passage and a fair hearing, but he also warned her that he was still bound by his oath to the king. The unveiling was about to begin. Emmeline knew that she was walking into a trap, but she also knew that she had no other choice. She had to trust Sir Roderick, to believe that he would honor his word. She had to confront her accusers, to expose their treachery, and to clear her name. She prepared for the journey, gathering her courage and her resolve. She knew that the meeting at the Hunter's Glade would determine her fate, and the fate of her son. It was a gamble, a desperate attempt to turn the tables on her enemies. But she was prepared to risk everything, to fight for her freedom, for her honor, and for the future of the kingdom. The time for hiding was over. The time for truth had come. Chapter 15. Echoes of the Past. The Hunter's Glade was a place of ancient power, a clearing nestled deep within a primeval forest, where the trees stood tall and silent, their branches intertwined like the threads of a tapestry. It was a place where hunters had gathered for centuries, a place where the veil between the mortal world and the spirit world was said to be thin. Emmeline arrived at the glade at dawn, accompanied by Thomas and a small escort of monks who had insisted on providing them with protection. The air was crisp and cold, the ground covered in a layer of frost, the silence broken only by the rustling of leaves and the distant call of a bird. Sir Roderick was already there, waiting for her. He stood alone, his back to a towering oak tree, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. He was dressed in his full armor, the sunlight glinting off the polished steel, his falcon crest emblazoned on his chest. He looked like a figure from a legend, a knight of old, a guardian of the realm. As Emmeline approached, he turned to face her, his eyes meeting hers across the clearing. She saw a mixture of emotions in his gaze: suspicion, determination, and something else, something that looked like respect. "Lady Emmeline," he said, his voice a low rumble that echoed through the glade. "You have come." "I have," Emmeline replied, her voice steady, despite the turmoil within. "As I promised." She dismounted, handing the reins of her horse to Thomas. She walked toward Sir Roderick, her head held high, her expression composed. She stopped a few feet away from him, her eyes locking with his. "I am here to clear my name, Sir Roderick," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "I am here to tell you the truth." He remained silent, his gaze unwavering, his expression unreadable. He was waiting for her to speak, to present her case, to convince him of her innocence. "I know that I have been accused of treason," Emmeline continued, her voice gaining strength, "that I have been branded a traitor by the king. But I am not a traitor, Sir Roderick. I am a loyal subject of the crown, and I have always acted in the best interests of the realm." She paused, drawing a deep breath, preparing to reveal the secrets she had guarded so carefully for so long. She spoke of Lord Ashford's betrayal, of his secret dealings with Lord Beaumont, of his plot to destabilize the kingdom and seize power for himself. She presented the evidence that Thomas had gathered, the letters, the testimonies, the proof of Ashford's treachery. As she spoke, she saw a change in Sir Roderick's expression. The suspicion in his eyes began to fade, replaced by a dawning realization, a growing understanding. He was listening to her, he was believing her. But there was more. Emmeline knew that she had to reveal the deepest secret of all, the one that she had kept hidden for years, the one that could either save her or destroy her. It was a secret that echoed from the past, a secret that linked her to Sir Roderick in a way that neither of them could have imagined. She spoke of her late husband, Lord Alaric, and of his friendship with Sir Roderick's father, a knight who had died in battle alongside Alaric. She spoke of a promise that had been made, a vow that had been sworn, a secret that had been passed down through the generations. A secret about a hidden heir to the throne, a child who had been spirited away to safety, a child whose existence threatened the very foundation of the kingdom. The echoes of the past reverberated through the glade, weaving a new thread into the tapestry of their lives, a thread that bound them together in a shared destiny. She looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope, and waited for his reaction. Chapter 16. The Sword's Edge. Sir Roderick listened in stunned silence, the weight of Emmeline's revelation pressing down on him like a physical blow. The echoes of the past, the secrets she had unveiled, shattered his carefully constructed world, challenging his beliefs, his loyalties, his very identity. He had always believed in the sanctity of the crown, in the divine right of kings. He had dedicated his life to serving King Henry, to protecting the realm from its enemies. But now, Emmeline had presented him with a truth that could unravel everything, a truth that could plunge the kingdom into chaos. A hidden heir to the throne, a child spirited away to safety, a secret guarded for years. It was a story that belonged in a ballad, a legend whispered in hushed tones around a campfire. But it was real, and it was happening now. He looked at Emmeline, his eyes searching, probing, trying to discern the truth from the lies, the reality from the illusion. He saw the pain in her eyes, the weariness of a woman who had carried a heavy burden for too long. He saw the courage of a mother who would risk everything to protect her son. And he saw something else, something that resonated with his own soul, a connection that transcended the boundaries of rank and duty. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked, his voice hoarse, his throat constricted.
"Why now?"
"Because I trust you, Sir Roderick," Emmeline replied, her voice steady, despite the turmoil within. "Because I believe that you are a man of honor, a man who will do what is right, even if it means challenging the king." "You ask much of me, Lady Emmeline," he said, his voice filled with conflict. "You ask me to betray my oath, to turn against my king." "I am asking you to uphold a higher oath, Sir Roderick," Emmeline countered. "An oath to the realm, to justice, to truth. An oath that your father swore alongside my husband years ago." She spoke of the promise that had been made, the vow to protect the hidden heir, to ensure that the rightful ruler would one day ascend the throne. She spoke of the sacrifices that had been made, the lives that had been lost, in the name of that promise. Sir Roderick's mind was reeling. He remembered the stories his father had told him, the tales of valor and loyalty, of a secret mission, a hidden child. He had always dismissed them as legends, as embellishments of a grieving father. But now, he realized that they were true. He looked at Thomas, standing beside his mother, his face a mixture of hope and apprehension. He saw the resemblance to his father, to the man who had died protecting the realm. He saw the rightful heir to the throne. The sword's edge was sharp, the decision perilous. He was torn between his duty to his king and his conscience, between his loyalty and the truth. He had to choose, and the fate of the kingdom and his own soul hung in the balance. He walked away, pacing the glade, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. The weight of his decision pressed down on him, the echoes of the past swirling around him like a storm. He was a knight, a warrior, a man of action. But this was not a battle that could be won with steel. This was a battle of the heart, a battle of the soul. Finally, he stopped pacing, turning back to face Emmeline and Thomas. His eyes were filled with a mixture of emotion, sadness, determination, and something else, something that looked like resolve. "I will help you," he said, his voice firm, his words ringing through the glade. "I will honor my father's oath. I will protect the rightful heir." The sword's edge had been crossed. The decision had been made. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Sir Roderick Locksley, the king's shadow, had chosen his side. And it was not the side of the king. Chapter 17. A Crown of Thorns. Sir Roderick's decision was a turning point, a moment of profound significance that would alter the course of their lives and the fate of the kingdom. It was a decision born of honor, of loyalty to a higher ideal, of a commitment to truth and justice. But it was also a decision fraught with peril, a step into the unknown, a rebellion against the established order. He outlined his plan, a daring gambit that would require courage, cunning, and a measure of luck. He would return to court, ostensibly to report on his investigation, but in reality to gather support, to identify allies who were disillusioned with King Henry's rule, who were willing to risk everything for a chance at a better future. "It will be dangerous," Sir Roderick warned, his voice grave. "The king's wrath is a formidable force. And Lord Beaumont, who is now aware of your escape and Ashford's disappearance, will be watching my every move." "We are prepared for the danger," Emmeline replied, her voice steady. "We have faced worse." "We must be careful," Thomas added. "We cannot afford to make any mistakes." Sir Roderick nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of determination and concern. "We will need to be discreet," he said. "We will need to communicate in secret, to avoid arousing suspicion." He proposed a system of coded messages, using a network of trusted contacts, merchants, and messengers who were sympathetic to their cause. He also arranged for Emmeline and Thomas to remain hidden at the monastery, under the protection of Brother Anselm, until the time was right to act. As Sir Roderick prepared to depart, Emmeline felt a surge of gratitude, a sense of hope that had been rekindled by his unwavering commitment. She knew that she had placed her trust in the right man, that he would not betray them. "Thank you, Sir Roderick," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "For everything." He looked at her, his eyes meeting hers across the clearing. She saw a warmth in his gaze, a tenderness that she had not seen before. It was a fleeting moment, quickly masked, but it was there. "I am doing what is right, Lady Emmeline," he said, his voice soft but firm. "That is all that matters." He turned and mounted his horse, his figure silhouetted against the setting sun. He looked like a knight from a ballad, a hero embarking on a perilous quest. As he rode away, Emmeline watched him go, her heart filled with a mixture of hope and apprehension. The days that followed were filled with tension and uncertainty. Emmeline and Thomas remained at the monastery, their lives confined to the ancient stone walls, their days punctuated by prayer and quiet contemplation. They received occasional messages from Sir Roderick, updates on his progress, warnings of potential dangers. The news from the court was grim. King Henry, enraged by Emmeline's escape and Sir Roderick's apparent failure to apprehend her, had become increasingly paranoid and tyrannical. He had dismissed several of his advisors, replacing them with men who were loyal to Lord Beaumont, men who were known for their ruthlessness and their ambition. The kingdom was on the brink of civil war. The northern lords, emboldened by Emmeline's defiance, were openly questioning the king's authority. Rumors of rebellion were spreading like wildfire, fueled by the people's discontent and the growing sense of injustice. Emmeline knew that the time was fast approaching when she would have to act, to reveal the truth to the kingdom, to challenge the king's rule. But she also knew that she could not do it alone. She needed Sir Roderick's support, the support of the loyal knights and nobles who believed in a better future. A crown of thorns awaited the rightful heir, a crown forged in blood and sacrifice, a crown that represented the hopes and dreams of a nation yearning for justice. Emmeline prepared herself for the final confrontation, her resolve strengthened by the knowledge that she was not alone, that she had allies who were willing to fight for what was right. Chapter 18. The Heart's Reckoning. The summons arrived unexpectedly, delivered by a trusted messenger who had braved the dangers of the road to reach the secluded monastery. It was a message from Sir Roderick, brief and to the point. The time has come. Meet me at Dunmore Castle. Emmeline felt a surge of adrenaline, a mixture of fear and excitement. The moment she had been anticipating, preparing for, had finally arrived. The final confrontation was at hand. She shared the message with Thomas, who received it with a mixture of grim determination and youthful anticipation. He had trained for this moment, preparing himself for the battle that lay ahead, eager to prove his worth, to fight for his birthright. They prepared for their departure, gathering their belongings, arming themselves with weapons, and saying their farewells to Brother Anselm and the other monks who had sheltered them. "May God be with you, Lady Emmeline," Brother Anselm said, his voice filled with concern. "And may justice prevail." "Thank you, Brother Anselm," Emmeline replied, her voice choked with emotion. "For everything." They rode through the night, their journey guided by the stars, their hearts pounding with a mixture of hope and apprehension. They traveled in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, contemplating the challenges that lay ahead. As they approached Dunmore Castle, Emmeline felt a wave of emotion wash over her. It was her home, the place where she had spent her childhood, the place where she had ruled alongside her late husband, the place where she had raised her son. It was a place filled with memories, both joyful and painful. The castle was ablaze with lights, the sounds of activity echoing through the night. Sir Roderick had arranged for a gathering of loyal nobles, knights, and soldiers, men who were prepared to defy King Henry and support the rightful heir to the throne. Emmeline and Thomas were greeted at the gates by Sir Roderick, who looked relieved to see them safe. He was dressed in his full armor, his sword at his side, his falcon crest gleaming in the torchlight. "Welcome, Lady Emmeline," he said, his voice low and resonant. "Everything is prepared." He led them into the great hall, where a crowd of people had gathered, their faces a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. They looked to Emmeline, their eyes filled with hope, their loyalty unwavering. Emmeline stood before them, her head held high, her expression resolute. She spoke of King Henry's tyranny, of Lord Beaumont's treachery, of the suffering of the people. She spoke of the hidden heir, of the promise that had been made, of the future that awaited them. Her words were met with cheers and applause, with cries of support and vows of allegiance. The great hall was filled with a sense of purpose, a sense of unity, a sense of destiny. But amidst the clamor, Emmeline felt a pang of sadness, a sense of loss. This was not how she had envisioned her return to Dunmore Castle. She had hoped for peace, for reconciliation, for a bloodless transition of power. But King Henry's actions had made that impossible. She looked at Sir Roderick, standing beside her, his face a mask of determination. She saw the burden he carried, the weight of his responsibility, the sacrifice he was making. And she saw something else, something that made her heart ache with a longing she had not allowed herself to feel for years. It was love, a love born of respect, of admiration, of shared purpose. A love that had blossomed in the midst of danger and uncertainty. A love that was both forbidden and inevitable. The heart's reckoning had come. Emily knew that she could no longer deny her feelings, that she had to acknowledge the bond that had grown between them. But she also knew that their love could wait. The kingdom came first. The future had to be secured. She met his gaze, a silent understanding passing between them, a promise of a future that might be, if they survived the coming storm. The battle was about to begin, and Emmeline, with Sir Roderick by her side, was ready to face it. Chapter 19. Flames of Redemption. The confrontation with King Henry's forces was swift and brutal. The Loyalists, led by Sir Roderick and Thomas, fought with courage and determination, their hearts fueled by a sense of justice and a desire for a better future. The king's soldiers, demoralized by their leader's tyranny and weakened by Lord Beaumont's corruption, offered little resistance. The battle took place on the fields outside Dunmore Castle, the clash of steel echoing through the valley, the cries of the wounded mingling with the shouts of victory. Emmeline watched from the castle walls, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and pride. She saw Thomas fighting bravely, his sword flashing in the sunlight, his movements graceful and deadly. She saw Sir Roderick, a figure of unwavering strength, leading the charge, his presence inspiring his men to acts of heroism. The battle was short-lived. The king's forces were routed, their lines broken, their morale shattered. Lord Beaumont was captured, his treachery exposed, his ambition thwarted. He was brought before Emmeline, his face pale and drawn, his eyes filled with fear. "You have betrayed your king, my lord," Emmeline said, her voice cold and unforgiving. "You have betrayed your kingdom." Beaumont fell to his knees, begging for mercy, his pleas echoing through the courtyard. But Emmeline was unmoved. She had seen too much suffering, too much injustice, to be swayed by his empty words. "Justice will be served," she said, her voice firm. "But not by me, by the rightful heir to the throne." She turned to Thomas, who stood beside her, his face grim but resolute. He stepped forward, drawing a sword, the sunlight glinting off the polished steel. "Lord Beaumont," he said, his voice clear and strong, "you are charged with treason, with conspiracy, with the attempted murder of my mother. How do you plead?" Beaumont, realizing that his fate was sealed, offered no defense. He simply closed his eyes, awaiting the inevitable. Thomas raised his sword, his arm steady, his heart heavy. He was not a killer, but he was a leader. He had to do what was necessary to ensure the safety of his people, to secure the future of the kingdom. The sword fell, swift and decisive. Justice was served. But the battle was not yet over. King Henry, enraged by the defeat of his forces and the death of his advisor, had gathered a new army, a desperate attempt to reclaim his throne. He was marching towards Dunmore Castle, his heart filled with vengeance, his mind consumed by madness. Emily knew that she had to confront him, to end the conflict once and for all. She had to convince him to surrender, to accept the truth, to prevent further bloodshed. She rode out to meet him, accompanied by Sir Roderick and a small escort of loyal knights. They met on a windswept plain, the two armies facing each other, the tension palpable. King Henry, his face contorted with rage, his eyes burning with fury, looked at Emmeline with hatred. "You are a traitor, Lady Emmeline," he shouted, his voice echoing across the plain. "You have betrayed your king, your kingdom." "I have betrayed no one, your majesty," Emmeline replied, her voice calm and steady. "I have only sought to protect the realm from your tyranny, from your madness." She spoke of the hidden heir, of the promise that had been made, of the rightful ruler who awaited his crown. She spoke of the suffering of the people, of the injustice that had been perpetrated, of the need for peace and reconciliation. But King Henry refused to listen. He was beyond reason, consumed by his own delusions of grandeur. He ordered his army to attack, his voice a scream of defiance. The flames of redemption were about to be ignited. The final battle was about to begin. Emmeline looked at Sir Roderick, her eyes meeting his across the battlefield. She saw the love in his gaze, the unwavering support, the promise of a future together, if they survived. She drew strength from his presence, from his courage, from his devotion. She was ready to face her destiny, to fight for her kingdom, for her love, for her future. Chapter 20. The Weaver's End. The battle was fierce and unrelenting. The two armies clashed, steel against steel, a whirlwind of violence and chaos. Emmeline, though not a warrior, remained on the battlefield, her presence a beacon of hope and inspiration to the loyalist forces. She watched as Sir Roderick led the charge, his sword a blur of motion, his courage unwavering. She saw Thomas fighting bravely beside him, his youthful strength and determination proving him a worthy heir. King Henry, consumed by his madness, fought with a reckless abandon, his eyes burning with a feverish intensity. He sought out Sir Roderick, his former friend, his former protector, now his sworn enemy. Their duel was a clash of titans, a battle of wills as much as a battle of swords. They fought with a skill and ferocity born of years of training, their movements a deadly dance of attack and defense. The outcome hung in the balance, the fate of the kingdom resting on the edge of a blade. Emmeline watched, her heart pounding in her chest, her breath caught in her throat. She could not intervene, could not interfere. This was a battle that had to be fought, a reckoning that had to be faced. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Sir Roderick gained the upper hand. He disarmed King Henry, his sword point pressed against the fallen king's throat. Silence fell over the battlefield. The fighting ceased. All eyes were on Sir Roderick, on the man who held the fate of the kingdom in his hands. He could kill him. He could end the conflict, secure the throne for Thomas, bring peace to the realm. But he hesitated. He looked at King Henry, his former friend, his former liege, now a broken, defeated man. He saw the madness in his eyes, the despair, the utter ruin. And he saw something else, a flicker of humanity, a glimmer of the man he once knew. He lowered his sword. "I will not kill you, Henry," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of sadness and resolve. "Your reign is over, but your life is not mine to take." King Henry, stunned by this act of mercy, stared at Sir Roderick, his eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and shame. He had been defeated, not by force, but by compassion. The battle was over. The war was won. Emmeline rushed to Sir Roderick's side, her heart overflowing with love and gratitude. She embraced him, her tears mingling with the sweat and grime of battle. "You spared him," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "You showed mercy." "He is still a man, Emmeline," Sir Roderick replied, his voice weary. "And he deserves a chance at redemption." The aftermath of the battle was a time of healing and reconciliation. King Henry was taken into custody, his madness treated, his future uncertain. Thomas was proclaimed the rightful heir to the throne, his coronation a symbol of hope and renewal for the kingdom. Emmeline, her web of secrets finally untangled, her role in the restoration of the rightful heir complete, stepped back from the political stage. She had played her part, had fulfilled her destiny. It was time for a new generation to lead, to build a better future. The weaver's end had come, but it was not an end, but a beginning. A new tapestry was being woven, a tapestry of peace, of justice, of prosperity. And at the heart of that tapestry, woven with threads of love and loyalty, was the bond between Emmeline and Sir Roderick. Their love, born in the midst of conflict and chaos, had endured. It was a love that had been tested, tried, and proven true. The future awaited them, a future filled with promise, with hope, with the enduring power of love. Epilogue. Years passed, and the kingdom flourished under the wise and just rule of King Thomas. He proved to be a worthy successor, a leader who combined strength with compassion, wisdom with courage. He honored the sacrifices that had been made, he remembered the lessons that had been learned, and he built a kingdom that was both strong and prosperous. Emmeline and Sir Roderick, their love a beacon of hope and constancy, finally found the peace and happiness they had long sought. They married in a quiet ceremony at Dunmore Castle, surrounded by their loved ones, their union a symbol of the reconciliation and renewal that had swept through the kingdom. They lived a simple life, far from the intrigues of the court, their days filled with the quiet joys of companionship, of shared laughter, of whispered secrets. They often walked in the gardens of Dunmore Castle, their hands clasped together, their love a silent testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. Emmeline, her hair now silvered with age, her face etched with the lines of experience, found solace in the tranquility of her surroundings. She had lived a full life, a life filled with both triumph and tragedy, with both love and loss. She had played her part in the grand tapestry of history, and she had no regrets. Sir Roderick, his strength tempered by age, his eyes still holding the glimmer of the knight he once was, remained her steadfast protector, her loyal companion, her beloved husband. He had found in her a love that transcended duty, a love that had healed his wounds, a love that had given him purpose. They often spoke of the past, of the battles they had fought, of the sacrifices they had made, of the love they had found. They remembered those who had fallen, those who had been lost, those who had contributed to the weaving of the new tapestry of the kingdom. And as the sun set each day, casting a golden glow over the walls of Dunmore Castle, they would sit together, hand in hand, their love a silent promise, a timeless bond, a testament to the enduring power of the human heart. The falcon, once a symbol of shadow and fear, now soared freely in the clear skies, representing the peace and prosperity that had been won through courage, loyalty, and love. The weaver's web had been transformed, its threads of darkness replaced by threads of gold, creating a tapestry of hope and enduring love for generations to come.